we've come to a point in the season where you're right, Mason. It's nut cutting time, right? And Georgia is they got their nuts on the cutting board. So I'm interested to see what we get out of Georgia this week. Um, it was a tough week last week as Georgia goes on the road to Ole Miss, and the offensive line was absolutely dominated, Mason. And here we go again. Here goes Georgia having to face off against one of the more dominant defensive lines in the country. So I think that it begs the question, is 1 week enough time for Georgia to be able to get their act together on the offensive line and get some type of semblance of a organized, well put together offense? I think the general consensus would be no, Mason. But let's jump into this game and check it out. So, am I reading this correctly? I mean, my goodness, Georgia is a 10.5 point favorite here. Um, that's unbelievable in my opinion. And as you can see, the one that I pulled up a little bit earlier today, Georgia's favored by 11. It started off at 8.5. So let's try to make some sense of why the betting public is so heavy on Georgia this week. First of all, the game's in Athens, so obviously that has something to do with something. But that's not enough to throw this thing 11 points in the direction of the Bulldogs. Um, Look, we just kind of talked about it with Georgia a little bit, Mason. Um, and you can see the last few games that Georgia has played, high highs and some low lows, brother. This is an inconsistent offense for Georgia. I would say the defense has been very consistent. We can kind of look at some of the stats as we pop them on your screen, and we can flip around some of these slides and look at some of the stats and stuff. But Georgia's offense has been pretty much a one-trick pony this season, Mason. And I don't think that this is a good situation to be trying to get your run game going, right? But Georgia they haven't relied heavily on the run. They've thrown the ball 60 to 65% of the time this season. And Georgia just needs some type of change up in this game as far as the run game. Got to try to get to that 100-yard mark, and it really makes things a lot easier on this offense as the game goes on. But again, we'll bring it up again. The offensive line was just absolutely putrid last week. I have not seen a Georgia offensive line get pushed around to that effect probably since 2017 at Auburn, right? That's probably the last time I can really think of a Georgia offensive line. And I'm including all the Alabama games, okay? I don't think Georgia's gotten pushed around like that in a long, long time. And it had a little bit to do with the fact that there's guys out there that aren't your top level guys, right? Everybody's got injuries at this point, so I don't want to sit here and make excuses for this offense. But just looking at Georgia going into this matchup, what are some of the key takeaways or I guess keys to victory, you could say, for Georgia in this one? We know offensively it's a little bit of a change up with the run game. Got to be able to run it in some semblance. Got to figure out a way to get a push against this really awesome Tennessee defensive line. And wide receivers got to hold on to the ball. Defensively, Georgia's going to have their hands full trying to slow down the run attack of this Tennessee offense, which is what they primarily like to do. And they're very, very good at it as well, Mason. So what do you think about Georgia heading into this matchup?
Well, I think, you kind of said it at the beginning of the segment here. This game is going to be won up front. Shocker, right? It's an SEC football game, and it's going to be won on the lines of scrimmage. But I don't know that it really rings more true than in this matchup here. Tennessee's defensive front is very good. If Georgia wants to score points, they're going to have to block up front. This really tough defensive line for Tennessee. Now, one of the things that was interesting about Tennessee in the Mississippi State game is they did what they typically do. They had three or four players on the defensive line for most of that game, kept sort of a light box. And you saw Mississippi State be able to take advantage of that in some cases and gash them for some long running plays. Is Georgia going to be able to do that? Even though Georgia's run game has been effective for some of the season, at parts at least, even against Ole Miss, they ran at a pretty decent clip, around 4 yards per carry. Um, can Georgia get some gash plays? They haven't had those long runs. They haven't had the 30-yard running play. I mean, all season long, that it just hasn't been available for them.
Yeah.
We got the injury report not long ago, and Trevor Etienne was on the list as questionable. He's still ailing with a rib injury that he sustained against Florida. Cash Jones was seen in a boot this week. He's on the list as questionable. So you're really down to Nate Frazier. Branson Robinson's not going to be back. We know Roderick Robinson's probably out for the season. So you're trying to establish a run game with a backfield that is just
with
absolutely
with no running backs. Nate Frazier can't hold on to
absolutely.
the damn football, brother. I mean, I think we all saw that
Mhm.
last week.
Well, and on the flip side, Dylan Sampson's fumbled the ball in 3 straight games, so maybe there's a little bit of a wash there. But does Georgia trust another true freshman to get meaningful carries in this football game going up against that defensive front and with an offensive line that's ailing as well? You've got Micah Morris, who hasn't played in the past couple of games. He's been hurt. Tate Ratledge, coming back from the tightrope surgery, has not been the same as he was before that. The left tackle has been hurt. All Ernest Green, he's been hurt for the past few weeks, dealing with a shoulder injury. So, I mean, this is a banged up group, and to try to establish the run in this football game is going to be very tough. Now, I mentioned Tennessee likes to put four on the line and kind of get a pass rush with four, and they can do that. I mean, this defensive front can do it with four, especially if James Pierce is healthy. We're not sure of the status of him going into this football game. But if Georgia's going to get any success in the pass or the run game, they've got to do a good job up front blocking this defensive line. And then, even if you do that in the pass game, you got to worry about a second and third level of the defense that has played at a really high level this year as well. So it's going to be really tough for Georgia. Make no doubt about it. This defense does not give up a ton of points, and Georgia has not scored a lot of points either. So for the Georgia offense going up against this Tennessee defense, I think that's where the game is going to be won. But realistically, both teams have struggled on offense all season, and both defenses have been leading both of these teams.
Yeah. So one thing that I always like to look at in these matchups is not really necessarily common opponents, but and which I do like to look at that as well. But what opponents has each team played that are similar to the team that they're going to play? And I think Georgia has got a little bit heavier dose of what they're going to deal with dealing with Tennessee in this game versus what Tennessee has dealt with. Georgia is kind of a different looking offense in the SEC this year. It's they're not great at sustaining drives, and Tennessee is really good on defense as far as third downs. So that's going to be something that I really, really want to look at in this game. As you can see on your screen there, Tennessee second in the nation third down conversion allowed, 24.21. And Georgia, as you can see offensively, they're 83rd in the country at 38.6 third down percentage. That literally has nothing to do with anything other than running the football. Georgia is not good at running the football. They're not good at getting ahead of the sticks. And not to mention, when we've seen Georgia sputter, not only are they not good at getting ahead of the sticks, they'll get penalties and things like that kind of negate some of those first down plays. We saw that a ton last week against Ole Miss. Georgia couldn't really do anything right offensively at all. So with that being said, I haven't seen Georgia struggle like they did this past week every single week, and so I just want to be clear: this is a super inconsistent offense, kind of like Arkansas in the fact that when Georgia's offense is running and things are good, things are really good, but when things are bad, they're like really bad, right? And we haven't seen a ton of the really bad this year. First half of the Alabama game, and then last week against Ole Miss, and then we've seen some inconsistencies in between. Georgia's going to have a much more consistent offensive attack. And look, what I was kind of getting at with the whole Tennessee hasn't really played an offense like Georgia. They haven't. Look at some of Tennessee's their last 5 opponents that you'll see here on the screen. None of these are teams that you would look at and say, "Wow, that is a passing attack right there. That is a really good passing attack. Not a whole lot of that. So I think the Tennessee secondary is very good. I do. But what is it? What does it look like whenever you go against a passing attack that is a Georgia has got one of the better in the country. I mean, passing yards per game, 16th in the country, 286.4. Pass yards per attempt, 7.7. That's 46. That's good. Pass plays of 20 plus yards, Georgia's top 10 in the country with 42. So as you can see, this is an explosive offense, not one that is very good at moving the sticks and sustaining drives. And I'll cut right to the chase, Mason. I think this is going to be a defensive football game right here. What is the over under on this one? It's at 48.5. I'm willing to take the under on the 48.5 in this game as it sits right now. That's really been my thought all week. I don't think either one of these offenses is about to go out and put on any kind of clinic. Let's talk about the Tennessee offense for a second. We've looked at some of the stats, and I'll pull those back up. I know I keep flipping around, but the passing attack, the numbers, I don't think necessarily reflect what has been put on the field by Tennessee this season. A lot of those passing numbers were kind of padded at the beginning of the season. And we've seen Nico, first-year starter. He's kind of struggled a little bit here and there, struggled with consistency, making some kind of silly mistakes. The tackles for loss allowed and the sacks allowed is what I think is going to make or break this game for Tennessee. If Georgia is able to get after Nico and get after him and move him off of his spot in the pocket, I think it's just going to be a really, really tough day for Tennessee, Mason. And not to mention, Nico has had issues with getting sacked and fumbling the ball. And that's not even to mention the fact that we're coming off a week where I've heard mixed reviews. He's healthy. He's not healthy. He's healthy. He's not healthy. I don't know. Who knows? He'll play. I don't have any doubt that he'll play. Is he banged up? Probably, just like everybody else on the team at this point in the season. We'll see if anything becomes of that. But what I really worry about with Nico more than anything at this point, as far as if you were a Tennessee fan, it's protecting the football while you're in the pocket. Georgia's got some dudes that'll come off the edge, and we saw it at Texas. We saw it at the beginning of the Ole Miss game as well. Georgia can fabricate pressure, and this isn't the strongest offensive line in the SEC or anything. Like I said, 18 sacks allowed. That's going to go a long way in deciding this game as well. Yet again, surprise, surprise, the matchup along the lines of scrimmage is going to play a major, major role in this game. And I think Georgia's defensive line has got an advantage over this Tennessee offensive line. And I think the Tennessee defensive line has got an even bigger advantage over the Georgia offensive line in this game. So what gives, right? And that's why I say I think this is going to be a low-scoring football game. Tennessee would love nothing more than to be able to run the football and sustain drives that way. You're going to have to be able to hit one or two over the top. Tennessee's got the wide receivers to do it. I've seen Nico's got the arm. He's got, all the stuff. He's been overthrowing these guys on these long passes. A lot like Carson Beck, honestly. Carson Beck's done that his whole career. So we'll see. Is this the game where Nico can connect on a couple of those and back the Georgia defense off? We'll just have to see. Anything else on this matchup before we get into our predictions, Mason?
Well, I think when you look at the Georgia defense versus this Tennessee offense, and going back last week to Georgia versus Ole Miss, one of the things that Lane Kiffin did extremely well in that football game, and
glad you're bringing this up.
The score didn't really show this, but Ole Miss had 2 touchdowns in that game, and that was it. The rest was field goals, a lot of field goals, but they were carving the defense up. And the way that they were doing this so effectively is by throwing the slants, not necessarily anything behind the sticks. I didn't see a ton of screen passes or anything like that. Georgia's usually pretty good at tackling on the perimeters, although they have had a dip this season in that department as well. But if they want to get Nico in a rhythm and they want to affect this Georgia defense, it's playing up tempo, which Tennessee has kind of gone away from as the season's gone on. They haven't wanted to play up tempo as much. But I think it's a pretty effective strategy, at least when you're talking about going up against the defense. Now, if you're not connecting and you're not sustaining drives, then it puts your defense in a predicament. So maybe Josh Heupel sticks with more of a slower pace and tempo, or at least more of a neutral tempo in this football game. But the quick passes, the quick slants, Jackson Dart was just able to pick Georgia apart, and even Austin Simmons for the one drive that he came in
Man,
for
he
the
looked
second
good.
drive of that football game. It was scheme based, and Georgia was playing in man coverage on a lot of those plays, or at least they were playing man shallow and then had safety help over the top, but they wouldn't get to the safety help. They didn't want Malachi Starks having an opportunity to take a receiver out or anything like that. They had their passes were 5 yards down the field, and the receivers were making plays, getting 10 yards down the field, 15 yards down the field, and that was the blueprint set forth to beat this Georgia offense. I think that Josh Heupel, watched the film obviously and said, okay, maybe we can do some of this. Now, how does Georgia respond with that being out there and being put on film? That's another question. But to me, if you want to get your young quarterback some confidence in this football game, have them just play simple, throw easy slants. It's proven to be effective against Georgia. And let your receivers make some plays and get the yards after the catch and things like that. And Tennessee should win this game, no problem, I think.
Yeah, I think Tennessee's got a path to victory, surely. All right, let's jump into our predictions here. And I agree with everything you just said, and I'm glad that you brought that up. Ole Miss got the ball out so quick, and I think if Tennessee is looking to move the ball through the air, going to have to do it at least some. Then that's probably how you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to get rid of that ball quickly. You do not want Nico Iamaleava sitting back there, taking coverage sacks against the Georgia defense. They will go knock the ball out of that hand or hurt Iamaleava. And that's not what you want to see if you're a Tennessee fan in this one. I'll cut right to the chase. I like Tennessee plus 11 here. I'm not so sure that Tennessee wins this game, Mason. Look, it really the matchup. Everything seems to set up pretty well for Tennessee. Got to hit a play over the top or two in this game. That is mandatory for Tennessee in this game to back that Georgia defense up a little bit. I'm worried about Georgia's offense yet again. I mean, go figure, right? It's just not been very good, and it's banged up. I just there's no answers at running back right now. Everybody's got the turnover bug at this point, right? Carson Beck cannot stop throwing interceptions. I mean, he cannot stop throwing interceptions, and balls are constantly being tipped, and it has to do with the fact that the offensive line is being pushed into Carson Beck's lap. I mean, that's exactly what. And don't tell me any different. That none of this stuff. I've heard Georgia fans this week, Mason. I just want to slap somebody blaming Carson Beck. How dare? I mean, look, I know Carson Beck was smiling on the sideline or whatever, and that pissed everybody off last week. I've been saying his body language has been off for weeks, have I not? I mean, I've been saying it on this show. His body language is off. But this offense is not Carson Beck's fault, y'all. This offensive line is not good, right? This offensive line is not good. There's too many injuries at running back, too many young guys playing at running back. We talk about all the time. We say freshmen, 18-year-old kids can play at running back. Yeah, that's if they don't fumble the ball, right? And they're typically those freshmen are not picking up blitzes and things like that. And that's what Nate Frazier has sucked at this year. So I expect nothing else. That's what I expect this weekend. Nate Frazier is going to be the premier guy more than likely. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him put the ball on the ground once or twice. And Carson Beck's going to throw an interception or two. That's something that, as a Georgia fan, we just had to kind of live with and accept. But Georgia's been able to figure out a way to win despite all of this stuff. And really, it defies all college football logic. So, look, this is still Kirby Smart we're talking about. This Georgia team is being talked about in a not so nice light, right? Nationally and regionally and in the state. A lot of people kind of upset. Um, I think this is a spot right here that Georgia's going to be up for, obviously, and I'm interested to see what that means for this Georgia offensive line. That's really what it boils down to me. This Tennessee defensive line, we've talked about it ad nauseum this season. It is unbelievable. It is unbelievably talented. I'm interested to see what's up with James Pierce. James Pierce, I saw him go down last week. That guy is so good at setting the edge and getting a speed rush off the edge. I think he's a big part of this game plan for Tennessee in this one. Um, but I like Tennessee to cover that spread. I like Georgia to probably win the game. But Mason, I'm not rushing to bet this one, buddy. And if I am, I think I'm going. I think I'm going under. If y'all notice the total there, 48.5, it's even money on the over. So Vegas is trying to persuade you, give you some type of incentive to take the over in this game. And I think that has to do with the fact that they don't want to move the line. Um, the under 48.5, I think, is the play on this one. I'll keep an eye on that. We got our Thursday betting show, 7:30 Eastern. Y'all come join us for Between the Lines. That's what it's called. We'll see if we have a play on this game. Mason, what's your prediction here?
Well, I'm with you as far as my picks go, and I think that this game, it's going to come down to special teams by the end of it. I don't see Georgia winning this game by more than a touchdown. However, I will say if one team's going to blow out the other, it's going to be Georgia blowing out Tennessee. Namely because this game is played at home for Georgia, and Tennessee has not played well on the road. They lost against Arkansas. They had to kind of struggle for a win against Oklahoma. And Heupel just historically has not played well, or his teams have not played well on the road. Um, when you look at Georgia and what they've done, everybody's going to point to Texas and say, "Well, this is what Georgia could do," right? True, yeah, they could do that, but that game has been an outlier in comparison to the rest of the games that they've played all season long. That's not the norm. That's the abnormal Georgia playing at their absolute ceiling. So we can't predict that that's going to happen, but we have seen it happen. So when Georgia plays like that, like they did against Texas, then yeah, they could win by 2 touchdowns or something like that. In which case Georgia would cover. I don't. I'm not willing to bet that. Right. I'm not willing to predict that that's going to happen in this football game because we thought we would see it again against Ole Miss, and that wasn't the case absent the first drive of the football game. So to me, I do like Georgia to win in this game. I think that there's enough pride on this team. I think that the culture is strong enough to pull out a gutsy performance and win this football game. I think that it's going to be won in turnovers, though. I think Georgia's defense has not been very opportunistic all season long. Kirby has been basically begging this team to look for opportunities to strip the football and look for opportunities to pick the football and things like that. And so, to me, I feel like Nico in this situation is probably in a tougher spot, given that it's on the road. It's going to be a very hostile environment, night game in Athens. Crowd is the Georgia fans have already said, even if they're not wearing the black jerseys, they're talking about blacking out the stadium anyways. So the Georgia fans are going to come out and they're going to affect this football game. Can Nico secure the ball in this football game? That's the biggest question to me. I feel like Beck was better last week at protecting the football. Some of that was scheme driven and things like that. But yeah, give me Georgia to win this football game. I think it comes down to some special teams plays and protecting the football. It's going to be a good old fashioned SEC clash of good defenses facing off against one another. I like the under for this play. I like Tennessee to cover the spread, but I'm not rushing to bet that, like you said. I'll be looking at some alt lines for our show tomorrow night, and I don't see I don't see Georgia letting this one slip up this week. If Georgia loses this game, they're out of the college football playoff. If Tennessee loses this game, there's still a chance, but they would be considered a bubble team at that point, given their schedule and who they've beaten. But yeah, I'll shut up now. I like Georgia to win the football game.
I just wanted to kind of pull up some of these SEC rankings as far as offensively, and this is based on total offense yards per game and kind of where each of these teams are at. And look at Tennessee, Mason, third in the SEC as far as yards per game. Now, let me just say, that's not just against SEC opponents. So, I would have loved to have had that stat, and that was something that I really wanted to look at. Tennessee and Georgia both have not been nearly as good against the SEC opponents offensively as they have against out of conference opponents this season. So we'll see. I think it's going to be battle of a couple of defenses, Mason. I think we're in for a good one, and this is a college football playoff eliminator for the Georgia Bulldogs. Let's see what happens this weekend in Athens, Georgia.